It's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is sweep. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear sweep used is to mean to clean an area by brushing away dirt or litter. So with this first definition, you might think of using a broom in order to clean one's floor. That's very much connecting to this particular meaning. So we're brushing dirt or other things, usually into a pile to pick up and remove. A second way you might hear sweep used is to mean to brush hair back from one's face or to brush it upwards. So sometimes in storytelling and literature, you might hear of a character who brushes back his or her hair. And other times you might hear people talk about kind of a fancy sort of hairdo, right? And they're sweeping their hair up. Again, both of those meanings can connect to that particular definition. A third way some people use sweep is to talk about moving or causing something to move in a rather swift or smooth fashion. So people have talked about sweeping their hand along a particular item, as an example. A fourth way you'll hear sweep used is to move in a confident way. So with this fourth definition, I also think back to literature and perhaps a very confident character is described as sweeping into the room. Moving in a really confident way. They sort of know, like, I'm great or I'm perfect in this situation. A fifth way you'll hear sweep used sometimes is in connection to sports. And generally this is used in many playoff situations. So where there's a series of games and one team wins all of the games. Okay, so you'll hear that used. One team swept another. A sixth way to use the verb sweep means to search an area for some object or for something. Okay? You should know that sweep is an irregular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all we need to do is add ing to form sweeping. The past tense and participle forms of this verb have a spelling change. So we're going to spell the past tense and participle form S-W-E-P-T, and we're going to change from a long E to a short E, and this word can be pronounced swept. Swept. Okay? Now, we're going to keep talking about different meanings because there are so many phrasal verbs that use sweep. So I'm going to apologize here. I think today's video is going to be a little long as we discuss all of these additional ways to use the verb sweep. Let's begin by discussing sweep along. So sometimes as this phrasal verb is being used, people are describing the process of making someone really interested or maybe even really involved in something. An example of this might be, the team was swept along on a tide of emotion playing on its home soil. So this particular sentence is a passive voice sentence. It's past tense, passive voice. And here we're talking about the team being really interested, really involved, maybe a little more so than normal because of where this particular game was being played. Another phrasal verb you might encounter is to sweep aside. Many times when people use this, they're talking that we're treating something as not being important. It's almost like we're looking at the thing and just sort of pushing it out of the way. An example of this, his aide has swept aside the allegations of corruption. So here, has swept aside is an example of the present perfect. Right? So here, maybe we have a politician that's been accused of corruption, and the assistant, the person working or supporting that politician is great. Those allegations, we don't care, we're not paying attention to it, it's not important. Okay. The next phrasal verb we'll discuss is to sweep away. This can have a couple different meanings. One would be to eliminate something completely. An example of this: the diver was swept away by currents. There's been a few stories in the news recently of people sort of, unfortunately, perishing in the ocean, being pulled under. So the unfortunate thing here with this sentence, another passive voice, we're sort of saying the ocean was responsible for this action of completely eliminating this person. A second way sweep away gets used is to mean to overwhelm with emotion, with strong feelings. An example of this: he swept her away with the proposal. So maybe we're talking about a marriage proposal here, and someone is so moved, they're overwhelmed, maybe with happiness, with excitement, or other feelings and emotion. Another phrasal verb we'll discuss is to sweep back. This will generally mean we're pushing, we're brushing, or we're clearing something back and away. But generally, we're doing it in a very light or quick motion. Okay? An example of this: she swept back her hair before continuing her work in the garden. Right? So maybe we can imagine some hairs kind of fallen on her face, and she's just going to lightly push it back. So I think that's the thing that's maybe helpful to remember with this particular action. We're talking about things in a light motion, not a real forceful one. Let's continue discussing some more phrasal verbs. You might hear sweep in or sweep into. Many times when this is used, it means that someone or something is arriving or appearing all at once. So kind of out of the blue, unexpectedly. An example of this: is there a thunderstorm sweeping in? Right? So maybe we hadn't seen that forecasted. We hadn't seen predictions that there would be thunderstorms. So it might seem like it's arriving out of the blue. Is there a thunderstorm sweeping in is an example of present progressive or present continuous. The next phrasal verb we're going to discuss is to sweep off. This can have a few different meanings. We're going to talk about 3 of them. One would just mean to clean or clear some surface. An example of this: will you sweep off the porch? Okay. Now, you could just say, will you sweep the porch? And that's really has the same meaning of kind of cleaning, removing dirt. But you'll also hear people use sweep off in a similar way. Will you sweep off is an example of the simple future using will. A second way sweep off gets used is to mean to clear or drive something off with a quick and powerful force. An example of this: the flood waters swept cars and trucks right off the road. Okay. Here's an example of the simple past tense in the active voice. And we're talking about these waters being so strong, it just pushed the cars and trucks off the road. A third way to use sweep off is to mean to bring someone on a trip, and generally it's a rather romantic or sort of an exciting way in which this is being done. An example of this: has your significant other ever swept you off to a tropical destination? So here, significant other could be any type of partner: girlfriend, boyfriend, husband, wife, what have you. And here we're sort of asking, have they ever brought you on a really romantic trip? That's a yes or no question in the present perfect. The next phrasal verb we'll discuss is to sweep out. It's going to have a few different meanings. One would be to force someone or something to leave a position in a rather forceful or decisive manner. An example of this: Will the ruling party be swept out of power? So sometimes questions like this are asked before elections. This is also simple future again. We've got another yes or no question. We might be asking someone to make a prediction. Are voters going to decisively say, we don't want this current leadership to continue? A second way sweep out gets used is to mean to push, pull, or carry someone or something out all at once with rather continuous force. An example of this. The student was swept out to sea while swimming in the ocean with his friends. Here's another passive voice sentence in the simple past tense where many times it's rather interesting when we're talking about this motion in connection to water. Really common to hear passive voice. Many times when we're talking about ocean, sea, we sort of realize who's responsible for the action. It's Mother Nature. It's powerful water here. Let's continue with our last group of phrasal verbs. The next one we're going to discuss is to sweep over. This phrasal verb means that a particular feeling or emotion is beginning to overwhelm someone, and it happens rather suddenly, so maybe not in an expected way. An example of this: a wave of grief swept over the family. Here's another simple past tense sentence. Maybe the family has just learned that a loved one has passed away. And when they hear that news in that moment, they deep grief, deep sadness for the loss of their loved one. The next phrasal verb we're going to discuss is to sweep through. This can have several different meanings. One might be to travel or spread very quickly through some place or through some location. An example of this: COVID swept through the nursing home in April 2020. Unfortunately, this happened in many nursing homes and many other large areas where people lived. It's still happening in 2023, but we're talking about this particular illness spreading quickly inside of a care center for the elderly. The second way you might hear sweep through used is to mean to become dominant or popular. An example of this: Wordle swept through the US in early 2022. Now, this might be an odd sentence. If you're not familiar, there's a particular game called Wordle. It's done on one's phone or online, where you try and guess a 5-letter word. They're yellow and green squares that light up to kind of help you with that process. But this game became really, really popular. People were sharing on social media how they had done, how many guesses it took for them to reach their particular, the particular correct answer for the day. So, an example of something that became really popular. The last way you might hear sweep through used is to mean to move, rush, or pass quickly through some place. An example of this: the police swept through the building looking for the suspect. Okay? So you can kind of imagine maybe they run in, they look around, they check closets, they check places, and they continue to pass or move. The last phrasal verb we're going to discuss today is to sweep up. This can have a few different meanings. One would be to cause someone to feel really captivated or enthused about something. An example of this: the crowd was swept up by the rally's speakers. Okay, so here they're captivated, maybe they're becoming committed to the topic that's being discussed or talked about at this particular event. It's another passive voice sentence. The last way that we're going to talk about using sweep up, it's just another way to say we're cleaning up dirt or some other mess that's been left on the ground. Here's one more example. Will you sweep up before our guests arrive? Another simple future sentence. Now, let's spend a moment looking at some words and phrases related to our verb sweep. And the first word we're going to look at is just the noun form of this word. It has the exact same spelling and the exact same pronunciation as our verb. Just like our verb, the noun sweep can have many different meanings. We're just going to talk about 3 of them today. One way you hear sweep used is to talk about a comprehensive, a thorough search or survey of some place or area. An example of this: searchers will conduct a sweep of the east side of the mountain. Sometimes you might hear a sentence similar to this when someone is lost. Maybe they've been out skiing or hiking or doing something else in nature, and they haven't returned from their trip. So here we're going to look very thoroughly. That's what's meant by that sentence. A second way you'll hear the noun sweep used relates back to an earlier definition of the verb. So we can use the noun sweep to refer to the instance of winning every event, award, or place in some kind of contest. An example of this: in 2012, the San Francisco Giants won the World Series in a 4-game sweep. World Series, usually we say it's a best of 7, so the first team to win 4. But here, in this particular year, San Francisco won 4 straight games against the Detroit Tigers, and so it was over, and we'd call that a sweep. Finally, another way to use the noun sweep is to refer to that act of sweeping something with a brush or a broom. An example of this: can you give the kitchen a sweep? Right? So just another way to ask someone to use a broom to clean up the dirt or mess that's been left on the floor. The next related word we're going to look at is the noun sweeper. This can refer to a person or a device that cleans the floor or the road using kind of the motion we've been talking about here. So a way you might hear this used: the street sweeper is cleaning Main Street right now. Maybe you've seen these really large machines. They can be really loud, but they're also really good at picking up leaves and dirt and other debris that has collected in the street. Keeps things looking quite nice and lovely. The last thing we're going to talk about today is to either sweep something under the rug or sweep something under the carpet. This phrase is used to suggest that someone is trying to hide something. Usually hide something that's a problem, or trying to keep something a secret instead of dealing with it or talking about it directly. An example of this: we can't sweep this under the rug. We need to tell our supervisor about the problem. Okay? So you might hear different instances where politicians, government leaders have tried to hide something in hopes nobody would notice, but eventually those secrets usually come out. So you might encounter that phrase if you're reading news articles or maybe watching news programs connected to this. Thank you so much for watching today's video. I hope you have a great day.